Is that the address be agreed to, and I call the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and can I extend my congratulations to the member for Caldwell for her contribution this afternoon and just outline that she's doing a magnificent job for her community, and I concur with many of the comments that she made, and also can see the pride of the work that her community is doing in her community, for her community, and I think that her comments were brilliant. Can I also extend my community's best wishes to those in Turkey and Syria, as well with the earthquakes, extend our best wishes, and we will also go into some fundraising efforts, no doubt, when I return to the electorate. I had UNICEF in my office this morning, and I'm as the co-chair of UNICEF. We talked about the excellent efforts that they're putting in and how terribly bad the situation is, and the great work that UNICEF is doing with water, food, providing safe spaces for children, particularly those obviously who have been pulled out of the wreckage, who have lost their families. So thank you for that contribution to the member for Caldwell, and many of the points you made I concur with and agree with. But, Deputy Speaker, every single day really is an honour to stand here in this place, a great privilege to represent the good people of my electorate of Moncrieff. And the last 3 years have been probably some of the most difficult in living history, and we've faced very significant challenges that we've never really faced before. We had bushfires, we had floods, we had COVID-19, and yet Australians didn't falter. Australians remained strong. We came together as a community to support each other through some of the hardest times our country has ever seen. Australians indeed are strong, Madam Deputy Speaker. We had natural disasters, we had a pandemic that we all would like to forget, but we've learned now to live with. And as I look back at my time in the last term in government, I'm proud of the incredible work that the Coalition did to protect the lives and livelihoods of Australia. And if we cast our minds back, it was actually at about this time during the term that COVID hit, and the government, of course, had to pivot to managing the problems that our country faced and the grave crisis that was coming towards us. And of course, the introduction particularly of JobKeeper, the creation of JobKeeper, and the job seeker increase indeed, ensured that millions of Australians could continue to pay their bills, keep the doors open for their business, keep their employees employed, put food on the table, and of course ultimately support their families. And it was a difficult time for so many across our country. It kept businesses afloat and employers connected to their workers during some of the worst economic times our country has faced. And I had, at the height of COVID, I had about 10,500 small businesses on JobKeeper, which was around about double most other electorates across the country. And it was about $335 million, give or take, that kept my electorate going in JobKeeper alone. And those businesses, and still say thank you, when I walk down Cavill Avenue, or when I walk through Surfers Paradise, when I walk through Broadbeach, owners still come out and say thank you for what the Morrison government did during the pandemic. We also delivered a $600 million business and tourism package in conjunction with the state government, which my Gold Coast neighbours in Macpherson and Fadden and I strongly advocated for in Canberra, and it allowed tens of thousands of businesses, including those on the border communities there in the Tweed, to keep their doors open, their businesses operating, their staff employed, and of course their very important hopes intact. And we delivered also a $1.2 billion tourism package to drive economic recovery in pandemic-hit industries and regions, including 800,000 half-price tickets to 15 different destinations across the country, including about 200,000 airfares into the Gold Coast. And we remember at the time the Gold Coast airport closed, and they were midway through a $500 million upgrade to the terminal, which is now finished. But it was certainly a desperate time and a very uncertain time, and the Coalition government provided that certainty through JobKeeper, through the cash flow boost, and through these other incentives, including a $94.6 million support package for Australian zoos and aquariums that fed the dolphins at SeaWorld, $1,000 a week to feed one dolphin, the tigers at Dreamworld, and of course the koalas at Currumbin. And I'm proud of the Moncrieff community and the work that we did together to support one another. In March 2020, for the first time, I established the Moncrieff Community Cabinet, which brought together community organisations and faith groups to support and navigate the pandemic. And the first meeting that we had was on a phone hookup. There's no video at that point because it was right at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, and I wanted to make sure that I was connected to my community groups and faith groups to make sure that we had a road forward. And the Community Cabinet has continued on the other side of COVID today, and there's some 22 members now, and it's a platform for organisations to stay connected. They work together and they support one another to achieve fantastic outcomes for our community and beyond, and including raising funds and delivering goods down to the Lismore flood victims and up to Brisbane as well. So we weren't impacted on the Gold Coast, and we were able to help them. I just want to talk about some of those Community Cabinet members. There's as I said, 22 representatives in the Moncrieff Community Cabinet, 2 Chambers of Commerce, 4 state MPs, 5 faith groups, including the Anglican Reverend Jim Raystrick, who does a fantastic job, and of course in Surfers Paradise we also have St John's Crisis Centre, who was so important as an emergency relief provider during COVID, who do such an amazing job. We have Father Roman from the Greek Orthodox Church. They also did a drive during the Lismore floods to send some relief down to those in Lismore who were suffering. We have the Sikh community, who have a marvellous temple out in Nerang, who, goodness me, they made hundreds and hundreds of meals every day to help those who needed extra help that couldn't leave their homes during COVID. The Islamic Society, who also do great work, Hussein Baba, represented on the Moncrieff Community Cabinet, great work in feeding the community, particularly those from the Islamic faith, but also others more broadly. We also have the Jewish Rabbi Adi as part of the Moncrieff Community Cabinet, and the fantastic work that they do. And some of the not-for-profit organisations that I have there too are Volunteering Gold Coast is on the Community Cabinet. They do amazing work. Karen Phillips, the 2018 Gold Coast Citizen of the Year, is also on the Moncrieff Community Cabinet. If Karen, you don't know Karen on the Gold Coast, you're not worth knowing, because she knows absolutely everybody, and she's a heavy lifter in our community. Andy Rajapakse, who's at that time was the District Governor of Rotary International, of course, is also on the Community Cabinet. Mok Singh, I mentioned with the Sikh community as well. Cornelia Babbage from Multicultural Families Organisation, OAM, I might add, has done great work and worked so hard through COVID. And Anna Zubak from the Migrant Centre, so important the work she was doing to look after and support refugee migrants. Yas Matbuli from Serving Our People, a great charity on the Gold Coast. Marco Renai from Men of Business, who help those youth who are at risk of entering the juvenile justice system and help them through Year 11 and Year 12 and produce very fine men. Building Better Men is their motto, and it's a fantastic interventional program that really does get results for young people. And now, of course, as the Shadow Minister for Youth, I have a continuing interest in what they do at Men of Business in Southport. I don't think I've forgotten anybody there. Pushpinda Oberoi recently has joined, representing the Indian community, and he, of course, recently received a medal from the Indian Prime Minister for his work between Australia and India. And I have a fantastic Gopio community on the Gold Coast that he also represents, and the Baha'i faith also represented on the Moncrieff Community Cabinet. Shortly after establishing the Moncrieff Community Cabinet, I established the City Heart Task Force and delivered the Reimagine Gold Coast Job Skills and Industry Forums 2020 and 21, which set the scene for the future of jobs, skills and industry on the Gold Coast, looking at innovation, looking at workforce, looking at the areas that are now, of course, top of mind. And the City Heart Task Force we convened as the first and only cross-think tank on the Gold Coast and brought together leaders from key sectors across small business, tourism, events, education, construction, manufacturing, arts and sports, and now we've added the key pillar, of course, of sustainability and environment to the City Heart Task Force. So there's 12 members, but I do pay tribute to one of the members, Matthew Schneider, who we lost, and I paid tribute to in this very place last sitting week. Matt will be sorely missed on the City Heart Task Force in our regular meetings. We developed a cohesive framework with outcome-focused strategies to hasten our recovery from the pandemic, create job opportunities and rebuild simply our city heart. And now we focus on stewarding industry and business to parameters and requirements around net zero and Labor's new IR laws that will negatively impact business, and they need to be aware of that. I was proud to deliver for our local community during COVID-19 the $596,400 upgrade to the Nerang Bowls Club as part of the Building Better Regions Fund, and that fund, as we know, has now been scrapped by the Albanese government, but it's in its time. It's now ensured that the club can continue to serve their many local members and the wider constituency and community for the good people of Nerang. And I attended the opening just before Christmas, and it's been truly transformative in the clubhouse. A very nice environment indeed to have a beer and talk to those who live in the Nerang community. I'd like to thank those in my community who I won't name, but who helped form the committees that work through all the applications for funding rounds, local sporting champions, volunteer grants, the Stronger Communities grants, and the Safer Communities grants. And these are very serious rounds of grant funding that helps communities to be safer and deliver better facilities for our community. And I was very pleased to work on committees that I formed and able to work out where the funding was going to go. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it wasn't just the hard work of government or community and industry leaders that got us through the pandemic. It was also the hard work of our frontline workers who kept our country in a strong position. It was nurses, GPs, aged care workers, early childhood educators, teachers, ADF personnel, retail workers, truck drivers and so many more. And they worked around the clock to ensure that Australians could continue to access essential medicines, groceries and support when they needed it. And I remember the early days of the pandemic, watching as COVID-19 turned countries absolutely on their heads. And those countries still struggle today towards economic recovery. It caused untold sadness and emotion as countries like Italy faced skyrocketing death tolls, the bodies of loved ones filling the streets. It wasn't that long ago. Or when it gripped India and a shortage of ventilators sent their hospitals into chaos. We all remember those news stories. As the former Health Minister Greg Hunt, I pay tribute to him and the job that he did in that role. As he used to say, there were many countries during COVID who looked towards Australia and wished they'd been in our position. And although thousands of Australians lost their lives during COVID, many thousands were saved due to the hard work, dedication and quick decision-making of the coalition government, our health experts and, of course, the wider community. And as we chart our way out of the pandemic, we find ourselves in a better position than many countries around the world. The coalition's record of strong fiscal management, which I outlined at the beginning, meant that we were able to provide billions in economic support during the bushfires, the pandemics and the floods. But the pandemic has left a changed world in uncertain times, there's no doubt. Rising inflation, interest rates, fuel, energy prices, everybody knows that it costs more. Everyday items continue to increase. Breakfast at your local cafe is expensive. The cost of living for Australian families, no doubt, is going through the roof. And while we know that Labor has never been good with money, it's never been more crucial that this Labor government does not fall into its usual traps. We need to make sure that it spends Australians' taxes where Australians need it most. And let's not forget, the last time Labor was in government, spending got so out of control they had to stop paying for essential things Australians needed, like medicines. But with cost of living set to increase further, interest rates continuing to rise, the government needs to ensure that they are doing all they can to reduce those pressures for everyday Australians. And what we've seen from the government so far has been all talk and not much action. And as the opposition, we'll work tirelessly to hold them to account on all the promises they've made over the last 9 years that they were in opposition. They made promises like cheaper childcare for all Australians. And since coming to opposition, I've now been appointed as the Shadow for Early Childhood Education, and I'm very proud of the Coalition's record in this space. We undertook the biggest reforms in over 40 years, which saw more children in care, 1.2 million more. More than 280,000 more children are in early childhood education because of those reforms, of which I'm so proud. And I pay tribute to the former Minister Alan Tudge for the work that he did. And the women's workforce participation rate was at an historic record high when we left office. We left the place in pretty good shape. It was 62.3%. When Labor left office last time, it was 58.7%. And we'll see how the participation rate goes after we've seen the effects of the $4.7 billion cheaper childcare bill, which I remind the Prime Minister that we did support. We did highlight the flaws in that bill with an amendment, but we did support cheaper childcare for families. I think he said today, earlier today in the chamber, that we didn't support it. Well, we did support it, so I do like to correct the record on that. During the last election, the government made a number of big promises to make childcare cheaper. $4.7 billion to increase subsidies for families earning a combined $530,000, $4.7 billion and not a single dollar will increase a place in early learning centres across the country. No new places across the country. And while the opposition supports more access to care for working families, we've also raised a number of concerns, including no plans to increase access, no plans to address current workforce shortages and no plans to address thin markets and what we know as childcare deserts. Providers are closing their books, they're capping their enrolments, they're asking parents to keep their children at home because there are simply not enough places. And the government, what's the government going to do to ensure there are more places for children? They're not doing anything in this space. Which begs the question, what is the benefit of offering higher subsidies to more families if those families can't actually access? What is the point of doing that? I'm not the only one who wants to know the answer. The many families I've spoken to in regional, rural and remote Australia want to know the answer too. My Coalition colleagues want to know the answer. The families in Barker, in Mallee, in Forest and Grey want to know what's the government doing to increase access to childcare. In my own regional urban electorate, 400 on a waiting list recently I saw at one of the centres that I visited. These are just some of the electorates across Australia who have a large number of childcare deserts where there's no access at all. I'm going to just move forward, spend a lot of time on my Moncrieff Community Cabinet, and I congratulate all of those on the Cabinet for the work that they've done. But I want to just put in some thank yous into this speech. I want to acknowledge the many who supported Moncrieff at the last election. I thank the Moncrieff Federal Divisional Council of the Liberal National Party for your ongoing support and tireless campaigning as blue soldiers on the ground during pre-poll and on election day. I thank the Chairman, Viv Grayson, now for 4 years of service, his wife Di as the Treasurer, Gail Copley, the Vice Chair, whose birthday it is today actually, happy birthday Gail, Sue Lipp as well as the Secretary. In May 22, when we were all faced with relentless wild weather and rain, my first thought when I woke up that morning was for volunteers putting up bunting and signs in the very, very heavy rain. It was an awful day all day on election day, but they were there putting up signs. You all did so much work, and I'm grateful for your individual and your collective efforts and your unwavering loyalty to the party and, of course, to the office of the member for Moncrieff. To my party, indeed, I owe it all. To my whole team, thank you all so much for what you do every day, for your patience, for your loyalty, for your dedication to the good people of Moncrieff, but also supporting the member for Moncrieff here in Canberra every sitting week. And to finish, to the great people of Moncrieff, who have now been elevated from the good people to the great people of Moncrieff, thank you for once again choosing me to be your voice in our federal parliament. I truly love my community, and it's a role that I will never ever take for granted. I remain deeply humbled by your support. But most importantly, I promise to put your needs before all else. That is my pledge to you.